is radio architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on this wet and stormy cold evening in the Karam Karam swamp. We hope you're warm and dry and cozy wherever you are across this beautiful, magnificent and ancient continent. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation, please text us on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. And if you miss those numbers, you can hit the contact us button on @radioarchitecture on Instagram. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Robert Davidov. He is the founder and director of Davidov Architects, a Melbourne-based studio celebrated for its finely pared-back architecture. His work reflects a deep respect for context, materiality, and lived experience, resulting in projects that are both sophisticated and deeply personal. Rob's approach balances aesthetic, clarity with intellectual rigour, yielding architecture that is timeless, thoughtful, and quietly expressive. His portfolio spans new builds, heritage adaptations, and interior and product design, all underpinned by a consistent commitment to craft, atmosphere, and restraint. Welcome to the program, Rob.
Hi, Ilana. It's so good to be here.
So good to have you on.
It's been lined up for a few months now, so I've just been every week. It's getting a little bit closer. And then as you're reading out that intro, my heart starts racing. I thought, oh, this is live radio. This is a first for me, so be gentle.
Welcome. I will be, and I am with all our guests. It's now live broadcast number 96, so the centenary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The centenary is coming up really quickly for this program as well.
Yeah, it'll be here before you know it.
Truly, only 4 weeks away. And so blessed with the sort of conversations that we've been able to have on this program and the world of ideas that's been created, and to share that with our listeners. We're so grateful to everyone who's tuning in, and hopefully there'll be some more live texters joining us tonight on the program. And hello to anyone who's watching live on YouTube right now as well. There's a question, though, I like to ask all my guests first to get the conversation started, and that's, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
My dad was a builder, and I remember we moved through a few different homes through our childhood, but I remember possibly one of my earliest memories, which I think would be genuine and not something that I might have created from a photo, is a house we lived in that we were renovating. So as the renovation proceeded, at one stage, I think we were all living in the front room, which was at one stage the dining room. And I remember being Melbourne, half the time it's cold and wet, but going out into the new construction, but just finding it really fun with Dad involved in the build, working, and all of us kind of camping in the front room. So I think that might be one of my first memories, and it's kind of related to, and there's no coincidence in all of that being exposed to the construction industry growing up. But that might be one of my first
Kids are
memories.
so adventurous as well, and so much more resilient to living through a renovation.
Well, we're just, living through it. It's, I think Mum had to go through most of the trouble of keeping us warm and fed and it all under control, but that's really that renovation is just one of many, not necessarily renovations, but projects and homes that we moved through, and it did give me a lot of exposure to different houses and different dynamics that can set up, because a lot of people will have their entire childhood and adolescence living under one roof, one bedroom, but living in a dozen or so. Just through my childhood and school years, does give you exposure to how space can have such an impact on you personally and your environment, but also family dynamics, all of those things. Not to mention all the different materials and types of architectural styles and neighbourhoods, all of that different experience too.
It's all that lived experience that makes us better architects and better professionals. Even the wisdom that's passed to all students is work while you're studying, get some life experience, travel, so that your major project when you're graduating, that thesis, can be better. I wonder, had you met architects while you were a young child?
Not really, but I did know about this idea, what about an architect and architecture, probably from quite an early age. I bumped into an old schoolmate a few years ago that I hadn't seen for a long time, and we were in primary school together, and he said, "Did you end up being an architect?" So I know that I must have spoken about it as an idea when I was maybe 9 or 10. And I had other ideas in my teen years, but architecture was always on the radar. But I didn't know any architects, but I was aware of it. People would give me, for a birthday present, books on Frank Lloyd Wright and those types of things. So it was definitely in the air. But I loved drawing. I loved my Lego.
A very classic pathway, a very classic
and like
nurtured
I did,
experience.
Yeah, art was always one of my electives at school. So that was always, I guess, I had an interest and an exposure to architecture and construction, but I had a real strong interest in drawing and art history, and I think, and also maths.
There's an interesting fulcrum or turning point when you have all these ideas, innocent ideas about what architecture is and what it could be, and then you go to university and you start studying, and then there's a point at which the aha moment happens, and you sort of start being able to figure out what is it they want from you, what is it you're supposed to do with these projects, and where you're headed, and what architecture you're actually interested in. Do you remember that moment for yourself?
I don't know if it was an aha moment about this is architecture, because it's still really an evolving question in my mind. But it probably was what architecture isn't, and it's not a picture.
Mm.
I think when I was doing some of the entry exams, I'd done some work experience in year 12 at 2 or 3, maybe 4 architecture offices a week here and there on school holidays in year 11 and 12. So I had exposure by that stage to some architectural drawings, elevation sections, some of these basic ideas. And in some of the uni entry exams, they asked you to draw or construct something. And if I think about what I try to remember I had submitted, it was very, it was silly and juvenile, but what can I expect from myself? But it was very two-dimensional. And what I think architecture is about is something that's it's about an experience, and it's not about how something might look in a photo.
Yeah, it's a 3D space. It's actually a place to live and to dwell in and to
and
be.
I don't even like it. It's beyond 3D, because it's about how even if you see it in a snapshot and you can stand in the space once, that still doesn't do it justice. The best architecture wants you to come back and see it in the morning and in the evening, in the day and the night, different times of the year, from different perspectives. It can be so much richer. And then there's the acoustics. How do your footfalls sound on the materials? Or is it a hushed, quiet space? Do you hear trees in the background? So even 3D still sells it short.
The senses are so important.
So these are, the more you start to think about the potential of architecture, it can become daunting as well. And there can also be risk to try to load too much into a piece of architecture or into a room. And from a aesthetic perspective or from a functional perspective, I think so much of what I believe a good or responsible architecture comes down to that level of restraint to what's right for this project, what's enough. Mm-hmm. And that might sound mean or like you're trying to shortchange the project or the client, but it's really about achieving enough allows everything to be appreciated.
Would you say that, in your view, for your practice, the architecture is the background to life?
You could look at it that way, but I would say it's more of a way of framing life. So a background is probably more passive, even though the architecture we tried to create is really pared back. I think it still wants to be a character.
Yes.
We like ideas, like spaces to be very emotive. We like cinematography. We like thinking about how light will enter a space, and creating, if we're walking down a corridor, what are these view lines? How does a space open up? So in that way, the rooms, the architecture, internally, externally, there's a strength, and it really, the architecture wants to become a character. One of, like, really to show its personality in that way. It might encourage you to enter or walk or look a particular way.
That's that layer of behavioral psychology that goes into good architecture.
We love playing with, and when you enter a building, and you understand, or you might, become aware of some of these games that are played, or you walk into a building and sometimes you're on a tour and the guide might explain some of these techniques to really spell it out to you. They're the little gems about how architecture can manipulate in a good way, to make a space really, really profound. Yeah.
What does good design mean to you?
Good design, it means in a way everything, and it means, for me, it really means responsibility. I think I feel a lot of responsibility in our role as architects for many, many stakeholders, our clients, but the community, the environment. So many resources, all the tradespeople along the line. So much is at stake by us, a line on a page. And that's where, for me, it still comes down to what is enough and that idea of restraint.
Does that transfer into a responsibility for you?
I think that you could define that as a way of defining responsibility, because it would be irresponsible to use the wrong material or have a fussy detail, or to anything that's kind of superfluous or fun, just for the architect's ego, not for the benefit of the project. We want things that are going to be really durable, really enduring, and provide value. Yes, definitely joy, but long-term joy, not a sugar rush.
Yeah. And that's
not the Instagram hit.
Yes.
It's got to really deliver.
And that's the real definition of sustainability. Long-term, durable, permanent, something so beautiful people want to preserve it.
Well, yeah. If you can get it, if you're getting that far, then it's true sustainability. Yeah. It's hard to achieve, and really, I guess, a shortcut is for people to fall in love with it, because then they're going to care for it too.
Yeah. That's the trick about connection to place in architecture, is if we can get people to feel connected to where they are, to their community, to their city, to their local region, they're going to love it, they're going to care for it. And that's sustainability. That's part of that social sustainability.
And appreciating that everything, whether you're doing something of a good design quality or bad, it's still using these same resources. So I guess it's for architects and designers to pursue really good design in order to allow more people to buy in and believe in design too. Like, in many ways, we can be our own worst enemy, and it brings suspicion onto the profession or the design industry at large. when you see examples of bad design and frivolous design. So we all need to really be doing our best to be advocates for good, responsible design.
Yeah. It's so important just to emphasize and pick up on your point that whether it's good or bad, it's still going to use those materials. It's still going to be built. It's still going to be brought into existence. Just if it's bad, it'll end up in landfill.
And there are good and bad materials, but there's also good and simple ways. So yes, the materials are also need to be reviewed, on their particular merits, but the way things are put together might also have an impact on whether they can even be recycled.
Yeah.
But just picking the right materials and detail, and when I say detailing, it's like how they're being manipulated, how they're being put together, how many hands have to touch a particular part of a building for it to be finished. These are all things that add complexity and risk to the success of a detail in a building or the building itself. And that all still, to me, speaks of the responsibility. Like, de-risking a job is also part of being a responsible designer or responsible architect.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on some of the conversations that are happening at the moment about the potential speculation around removing legal protections of title of architect?
There's always been kind of speculation and even if there isn't, there were always people that called themselves an architect that might not have been registered architect or and bound by the Architects Act. And there are people in other professions, whether it's IT, that call themselves architect. They can be an IT architect, for instance, and there's no controls over that.
There's 3 exemptions under the Act: naval architect, landscape architect, and software architect.
Software. So,
and all of them get paid much more, except landscape.
We laugh about it.
It's very serious.
But we are about those exemption categories.
Oh yeah.
But it's really tough. There are architects that have but they've really defended the use of the title. And there are similar debates happening with doctors now as well. So all of these words and terms are up for debate. And I guess in a world where disruption is becoming so fashionable and defended generally by so many who would probably look to fight against this development, it's hard. And I say it's hard as an architect when really I should be defending the title, because in history so many of the great people that we call architects weren't. And even in my team, I've worked with people who, through no real fault of their own, have gone through their path and have been exemplary designers and documenters and passionate about the built environment, design history, architectural history. And they were on a different path. And yes, there are things they could do that would take a lot of effort to then get that credential. But look, I think at the end of the day, we can talk about it, and there's a legal way to be on the to be a licensed architectural practitioner and not. But I think a lot of people in the community would just look at, what do you do? What's the quality of your work? What do you stand for?
What value do you bring?
What value do you bring? So I think rather than focus on protecting a name, architects should focus on promoting the value of architecture. Put the energy to where it really matters.
Yeah.
A name is well and good. But if it's just a tool to create some kind of separation, it should be, if you're not an architect, there's no way you could fake it. That would be a compelling argument. There's no way a non-architect should be able to do and convince anyone that they weren't one.
That's so true.
Right. And then the argument would be over.
Yeah.
I can't call myself a nuclear scientist. I can't call myself a doctor. You'd put me in a theatre and I would fail in a second,
Exactly.
right? But if you could bluff your way to designing a phenomenal piece of architecture or even a really competent one, I'd say, well, maybe they are.
Maybe they get the title.
Maybe they get the title. There's so much stuff that you see that, wow, this is a beautiful piece of design. This is really resolved. This is really responsible. Who designed it? Not an architect. Well, they're not an architect by law, but if they were in another country or in another time, they would be.
Yeah.
I'd prefer to judge them by their merits.
I can think of two really famous examples right at the moment.
Yeah.
Everyone's favourite host of Grand Designs, Kevin McLeod.
Oh, of course, Kevin McLeod, famously
Not an architect. A painter, actually, apparently. House wall painter.
There's plenty of others. But now
James Turrell, the artist.
Yeah.
Verges on light and sensory experience, and it often gets wrapped up in an architectural form.
Gustav Eiffel.
Yeah.
The Eiffel Tower, we think, is a magnificent piece of architecture. He was a structural engineer. And there are many others.
Yeah.
And Australian examples too. But no, it's a contentious topic. I studied hard. I got my registration. I was really proud to call myself an architect only when I ticked every one of those boxes.
I still remember that day.
I was just going through all of those exams. That was a big sigh of relief when I got that, and I thought I never have to do another exam, thank God. But really, show me. It's not for me to judge, but I mean, let's. I'd be more interested in really people showing quality architecture, and then I'll worry about what I call them. I'm more interested in the work.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like when we have applicants for jobs. Am I concerned about what university they went to? Am I concerned about are they registered or not? Not really. I want to know what do they know about. I'm really interested to often talk to them about who their favorite architect is, what they're about, how passionate are they about architecture, and what are their skills. That's what it comes down to.
Yes. What are some of your top tips for students?
This is
and younger listeners.
Because I love speaking to students, and I've even spoken at my old school at Bialik College a couple of times at their career day. Top tips, but for architecture students who are looking to enter the market, you need a really good CV, but you've got to think about who is going to employ you and why. And it's because they're going to need you're getting out of it exposure to the industry and your first step on the ladder. They need you to draft or render or model make. You need to show some skills that you can bring to the table. So a CV or a portfolio that shows that you're really good at CADing, or you got Photoshop skills or rendering skills. All of being able to demonstrate that is really, really important. Then a lot of offices get, lots of inquiries, even when they're not advertising. So having an email that goes out that says why you're interested in the opportunity to potentially work at that office, and what some of your favorite projects from that office are and why.
Make it personal, right? We're all sick of receiving the generic, doesn't even have your name in it.
Sometimes it's just
Dear Sir, Madam.
To who it may concern.
Well, there's no sir in my practice.
But it might even be you've just BCC'd in 50 other architecture offices.
Oh, that's bad.
That's happened. That's really bad. That happens. And it's always fun to read through the list of what company am I with. But I've got a policy. If someone writes a letter, whether we've got a position or not, I'm looking at it and I'll write back.
Yeah. Because we've all been there. We've all been on the other side
I
of
remember-
sending that letter and sending that CV and portfolio.
So it's not easy. It's always hard to get that first job, but you need to show enthusiasm for the studio you're applying for, and show them in that portfolio, because they're only going to have a few minutes to look at your email and whatever attachments you've got. Show the best of your work, but don't. But that being said, it can't be 100 pages. But you want to show some demonstrations of your key skills. What are you bringing to the table? And then you can go a little bit more expansive if you're lucky enough to get the interview. Yeah, that's how. But you gotta make it personal.
Yeah. Got to. No generic emails.
Generic is don't even bother, because it's not going to appeal. But not just say, oh, dear Ilana, it's got to be, I like these projects. I understand, or I believe I have some kind of resonance with what your studio architecture and design is about. This project was a standout for me. Really, I'm on this wavelength, and I did a similar thing, or it inspired me to do this particular project at uni. Make it, spend 5 minutes on this letter. You might. It would be better to do that and send out 10 or 20 than to just blast out 50 that mean nothing.
Absolutely. That no one's ever going to look at. Resist this temptation in the age of AI to get shockingly lazy with emails and correspondence, and invest in the ideas and invest in the human connection. I'm wondering, because architecture is all about ideas and it's about bringing it together in that built form, do you have some really core big ideas that you keep returning to project after project, even if it's not intentional, but something you find recurring for yourself?
In terms of big ideas, no. The small ideas are what, because we talk about architecture or these idea of prototyping. And for me, this really comes down to, I don't want to keep talking about this idea of responsibility, but this is really for me where the rubber hits the road. Every architectural commission is a prototype. So fundamentally, this building is new. It's never been done before. And that's like, I might have a similar brief, but it's in a different place. It might be an extension or a renovation to a heritage project, so it's already going to be different, or it's new, but every site is different, and the budget's different, and the time is different. So every project is different. So that's already in itself risky. So how do we manage the risk? Well, if you know already that everything is going to be new, for me it's to think, well, what do I know will work? So when we've got a tried and tested element of the building, whether it's material, a detail, different fixtures, and in those combinations, I like the idea of iteration. So we'll keep trying things and refining them when we know that it's part of a building that will be used again and again. And I find that to be not the big thing, but the really small thing that I know that bit, the whole project, we don't know what it's going to be like, but that bit I know will work. Yeah. And that I find to be reassuring. It might be really boring, but for me, that's actually the exciting part, because architecture is a lot about the building is a product at the end of the day, and we're living in this world where we're surrounded by really, beautiful objects that are made a billion times, so they can afford to be refined. So why wouldn't I want to try to get that level of refinement through this opportunity to iterate and develop a design over many projects? And I really find delight in that, and confidence in that. It's kind of like striving for the perfect detail or the perfect bathroom, where the circumstances might change and the client's tastes might change, but you just keep heading towards this direction where you got that covered.
Most people don't realize that they're not just buying a product, the building, the drawings, that they're actually buying the process. And it's years of your life, years to have the architect stress about your bathroom and that little detail that you just described. It's a whole relationship. And with bespoke projects, that's what you're investing in. Someone to care, to listen, to worry, and to push for that one little detail, that one bit to work.
Sometimes it's the smallest little things that our whole team will just sit around and debate. And that's kind of, from the studio sense, that's the fun part. Really thinking about how people will engage with a bench top or a light or a handrail, and refining, or talking about it and sketching it and forming it and modeling it and thinking about how something will feel in your hand, on a cold morning or, after 10 years of use, and how it will age. This is part of the what makes, I don't know if that's architecture or not, but that's what gets architects going.
Yeah.
Right? We get really excited about these little details that might seem really inconsequential to a lot of people, but I would say if they experienced it and were asked about it, they'd probably say that did feel, for whatever reason, they might not be able to pinpoint it, that would feel nice. These shouldn't, we might obsess about these details, but I believe, we tell ourselves it, but I sincerely believe that when you do get to execute a design really successfully, whether people are interested in architecture or not, they're going to appreciate the space.
Yes.
On a very different level.
Yes.
And they might not have the words, but they're going to know.
Do you get those follow-up phone calls or emails where, well after handover, they've maybe lived in the home for a few months and then they've discovered something that works really well, something that's really nice, something that, that you can't possibly talk them through every single little bit and piece, and then
we can't, and sometimes I don't even like to.
You leave the surprises, the Easter eggs.
Whether it's we're leaving the surprises are really nice. Sometimes it's the ones that we kind of needed to explain, because they might have been a little bit obvious and someone said, well, what's that about? And there's been that, yeah, okay, we'll go with you. And then you might get the call and go, yeah, I'm glad we did that. That works. And that's really nice. But the surprise is the people noticing something that it's just how we wanted to do it, and we didn't discuss it because it didn't necessarily impact one way or another. That's really nice too. Yeah. That's it's all of these little things we make. Sometimes we'll joke that when a client sits down with an architect on the first day, they probably don't understand how many decisions are about to be made. Some of them will be made clearly with them, and thousands of other micro decisions are going to be made on their behalf.
Yes.
But from a project's conception to even when we hand it over to the builder, and there's still thousands more beyond that, there are so many seemingly arbitrary decisions, but they're built up of, what become decades of experience.
Yes.
And
say something about how important trust is in all of that.
Trust is this very, very precious thing. I'm writing an article at the moment, and it's based on an expression I sometimes use, which I think is important, and it's architects aren't court-ordered.
And what do you mean? Say more.
What I mean by that is, for me, a client's key responsibility is to find an architect that most closely, but not perfectly, because there's no such thing as perfect, but closely aligns to their vision and excites them. what that allows is trust. If you've already done the research and you've found someone that you want to work with, you should be able to loosen that rope, give them some slack, and challenge you in good ways. And you'll both benefit. Why both and why that's important? Well, the client's going to benefit because they're going to get something that they couldn't imagine themselves. Because if they could, well, what's the point? They should have just drawn it up. But the challenge is good because they're going to get this extra thing. And what is that? Well, maybe that extra thing is architecture. But when an architect, you have to think about it on the flip side. And if you're the client, think about this. Architects are pretty simple at the end of the day. They love architecture. And if you give them the opportunity to design something, they're going to be a dog with a bone. They're very, very happy. So when you find someone and say, I like what you do and I want a piece of it, you start to get this amazing relationship and so much passion and effort because you're both on the same page too. I don't think I'm explaining this right, but when you find an architect and it's not really a good fit and you're butting heads, the client's not enjoying it because it's not really coming together. And the architect's not enjoying it because they're just not getting it right because they might have one idea and the client's got a different idea and it's coming to this too many conversations, too many compromises, and no one should be compromising.
You're not a good fit. It's like
it's
dating.
Not the right fit.
It's like dating. Got to find the right person.
Find the right fit because when it all comes, instead of the conversation saying, this isn't really right for me, sometimes it's, this is great, and sometimes it's, I think you can, you're on the right track, but I think you can do even better. And if you're in a position to tell your architect, I think you can do better, that is
amazing.
Basically waving a red flag to go, amazing, let's really go. And that's where real magic can happen. When you start to say, let's go, let's get, like, I think you can, I've seen what you can do, let's do this, let's push, I want more, then you're both winning. The architect is fully engaged, very, very excited, and the client's going to get the best out of them. Yeah. I don't even know what the question was, but that's one of,
I just love the picture you painted for us of that really successful dream dynamic. And I'm sure there's many listeners who are practicing architects who are listening right now and thinking, where do I find that? How do I find that? Not to mention people from across so many different disciplines who are service-based professionals thinking, that's what I need in my life.
It's not every day that you find clients that share such a strong vision, and it's a gift and it's a blessing. But you never forget those relationships. But I remember there's a house that's soon to be finished that we've been working on for a long time. Too long.
How long?
Too long.
No, you must tell us because I love sharing with the listeners that architectural time is extremely long.
This is an extreme of extremes, and our client. Look, I think it really just goes as a testament to our clients' absolute commitment and passion
and tenacity
for their home and tenacity, because this project, look, it's going to be finished very soon. They're moving in very, very shortly, so it's done. But it's 6 years in the making, and
wow.
it's not a large home, but there was a lot of trials. We had to go to VCAT. That took a long time. Then we had COVID, and that slowed a lot of things down. And the build just took longer than was expected. But I bring that up only to recall the first. I got a call out of the blue. I think they'd seen some of our work, and we hadn't. The firm had only been around for 6 or 7 years by that stage, and they'd seen some of our work online. And I came out to see them at the house, which is the old house, which is where the new house now stands. And inside the front door was a bookshelf, and I said, "We have the same books." And I thought, these are my people. So I didn't know then how right I was, because our clients on that job have been such champions of architecture, but of our vision and their vision, and it's one and the same. It's been remarkable. It's so yeah, we've had since, but I'll never forget, because that was really probably the first time we've had someone who was that aligned, but also just committed. Because you said the tenacity, it's a marathon, and you just need to hold the course, because along the way there are so many people who would make your life easier if you just compromised.
Yeah.
In a million and one ways. Don't do it that way. And sometimes it's just you have to ask the question again, or ask somebody else, or try a different angle, or be patient. But
where there's a will, there's a way, I always say.
And I think the rewards can be really profound. You get if you've got all of that energy and that passion, you are rewarded with a piece of architecture that it's something that they've invested not just a lot of money, but a lot of themselves, a lot of time. It doesn't happen every day. Like architecture is, it's not something that a lot of people naturally think about for lots of reasons, but when it's on, some people, for whatever reason, whether they're frustrated architects or they've been exposed but had other skills and pursued different things, when they want to invest in a piece of architecture, and they've done that first step and found their architect, really amazing things happen. Yeah.
What's your number one tip for a client or a listener who's starting to do their research, they're thinking ahead, and they're not too sure who or they could work with?
I would say if you have a particular aesthetic, try to find that person. But it's not necessarily about the aesthetic alone.
It's not just Instagram for sure.
It's not Instagram for sure. You want to speak to a few different architects, get a sense of them. Is this someone that I want to work with? Can I have a conversation with them? Because, as we said, it's a long-term relationship. It's like we say it all the time. It's not dinner. You can just pick a restaurant, and maybe it's going to be great, maybe it's going to be a disaster, but it's not the end of the world. Once you've started an architectural project, there's meetings and reviews, and you got to work together for a long time through the design process and then hopefully through the construction process. But you want to be in the same room. You want to enjoy the process. You want to enjoy each other's company. It should be real. The process should be really rewarding in itself, because you're going to be talking about things that are going to make the architecture. They're going to be passionate about it, and you should be excited and passionate about the same things. So meet a few architects, and then try to distill from those conversations what, if any of those conversations excite you about what your project could be about. Look, I've never interviewed an architect to engage them, but I'd imagine you would gel with some and not others, and share a vision. But you want to feel the enthusiasm, but you want to be enthusiastic too.
Yeah.
It's got to be, there should be that both ways.
You let me know during our sound check that you are working on your own home at the moment, and it's so much harder to design for yourself, isn't it?
I thought it would be a lot easier, because there's now, we get frustrated clients they'll say no to things we think are amazing, or they'll slow down the process. And I'm like, oh, we're taking that whole part of the equation out. There's no client. It's like, well, no, I'm the client. And
And it's your money.
And it's my money, and it's my shot, and it's my home. So it's look, some parts you are, because it's for you, you are able to be a lot more decisive and just do things, but you start to then miss the debate, the presentation, the arguments, and it's not. At the end of the day, an engaged client gets a good project. That level of scrutiny, of even if the architect knows they have to present and potentially defend different decisions, leads to a level of quality. When you take that whole piece out, I'm not presenting, I'm not doing the 3Ds and all of the things that we would otherwise do. Sometimes you kind of go, have I done enough? Have I pushed it hard enough? So there's definitely pros and cons. I've really enjoyed the process. I can't wait to see it finished. But it really does make you...
You miss some of that collaboration.
But it makes you think that the best work comes because of that level of scrutiny. Like getting that right relationship where the architect is excited to present, the client is excited to receive, and then there's that really good honest but constructive conversation that tests the ideas, tests the plan. That's where you get the good stuff. It's really like you can take for granted, we can just do what we want to do and it's done. But a level of scrutiny and an engaged client gets a better job as long as the alignment is there, because these aren't conversations about compromise. These are conversations about improvement. So it does make you even more grateful for a great client collaboration, because architecture can't really happen without it. We're not sculptors or artists that can go into a studio and create something. Architecture is a profession based on patrons and commissions. That's how it goes, and that's what creates architecture.
Yeah. It's a relationship of collaboration.
Yeah.
Who have been some of your mentors over the years?
Some of my first bosses were really great mentors. When I was finishing the last few years of uni, I worked for an architect, Ron Unger, and he was very, very good to me through my, I think, 4th and 5th year, and then I was with him in the first few months before I finished my graduation, and then I took a year of travel. But Ron was really was a good example of responsible, quiet architecture, where things just need to work. And there was really no ego for the flamboyant. I still remember these just really simple drawings and that was a really good background. And I keep going back because of the technology we've got, it's easier and easier to load so much in, and you lose what the drawing is all about, which is just communicating the design.
Right.
Probably my second boss, Michael Fuchs, was all coming into the market when I came back from my gap year. Was the beginning of the global financial crisis, so there weren't a lot of jobs going, and I was lucky to get a job for FMSA in North Melbourne, and working under a few of the directors, Peter Sando and Michael Fuchs.
Any relation to the famous Ernst Fuchs?
No, different spelling. So I worked with them, and Peter and Michael gave me some amazing opportunities and the experience they gave me enabled me to get my registration, also with some of the time that I'd done with Ron, in pretty quick order, and being able to work on some smaller projects that the office had and do a little bit of the contract administration just gave me a lot of good experience at a younger age.
What's the biggest lesson you received that you're still holding on to and holding close to this day?
One of my other mentors, Terry Callio, not an architect, she built a career in hotels and hotel management. So she was one of my first clients, and I remember a piece of advice she gave me very early on, which I never forgot, but probably could have listened to or held on to more, was it's not an expression, but it's basically bread and butter work is good, but always remember how much bread and butter do you need to survive. And what she means is it's okay to take on work when you need it, but if you fill up in the sense of loading up the office with work that isn't the work you want to do, it doesn't make space or give you the impetus to go and get or make room for the work that you do want to do. And it's a very hard lesson for a young or sole practitioner to take on. You've got to be really confident to say no to work, even if it's not the right work. But without making the space, sometimes having a quiet moment, or longer than a moment, forces you to focus and focuses you to think about how do you get the work you really want to do. But when you're filling up on work that's not right or not right for you, you don't have time to think about those things. You're just working on the bread and butter.
Yeah.
So that's, I'll never forget that bit of advice.
Then it's a fine line that becomes a fine line between what is the good and what is the bad design, as we discussed, and where is the opportunity to create the architecture. So many good lessons from you tonight, Rob. I wonder, where do you see the future of the profession going? Particularly, we're having so many conversations about AI. Do you use it in your practice? Are you feeling it as a perhaps get on board or get left behind, or are folks overreacting?
Of course, we're talking about AI. We're using some AI. We're hoping to use more. But look, there's people are nervous or anxious about how it will affect jobs and the profession at large. It's going to change the profession. It's going to change every profession. But I'm hoping we'll be able to use it as a source for good, to become more efficient, to do better work. From so far with our experiences, limited experiences with AI, I'm finding that it's enabling us to achieve less design, we're able to demonstrate that our architecture, being as pared back as it is still has a richness and a sensuality that we couldn't before.
That's interesting. How does AI help you achieve that?
Well, we're able to use or to give them examples of spaces and show their character in terms of lighting and materiality.
So like a generative text to image.
That will, for instance, that's not, we haven't got that to work yet, but we're still trying that type of thing. But it's really going to come down to giving those examples where it demonstrates that having less isn't having less design or less architecture, but it's actually having more.
Yeah.
And often we would find that the designs we first presented on the sheet or on a crude 3D perspective that we might knock up might just look just like that, like an idea. But it's very hard for us, let alone our clients who aren't necessarily that visually literate,
or
to
that
understand
3D
the references
visualization.
and to read into a drawing. How do you read into a drawing how texture responds to different types of light, how different materials respond to one another, how a detail might really work? So by having better visual aids, that's we're finding that that's helping us be more convincing about a simpler design. And a simpler design works for us on many, many fronts. So we're finding and that also, even in one level, just becomes a more efficient design process, but one that we find also more fulfilling and more successful.
You find you can focus on the things that really matter more and focus on the design more and let the computer.
Because I've long abandoned the idea of trying to harangue a client into it going our way. If someone doesn't like the design, they don't like the design. We can talk about it. If they're not sure about the design, we can talk about it. But if it's not working for them, I'm not here to debate and convince you into liking it, because all that means is we'll waste an hour talking about it, and I'll get an email from you at 9 o'clock that night or the next morning saying, it's not for me. And guess what? If it's not for you, it's not for you. It's your house.
Yeah.
So it's not to convince, but if these tools can help us describe a design that would otherwise maybe be in more primitive methods a little bit too abstract, then that's great. I'm going to embrace it. And everyone will win from that process. I think we're going to be able to achieve a purer form of the architecture we want to pursue through this process. That's why I'm excited.
You use it like a good tool and don't stress about it taking our jobs, because it's not at the level of replacing an architect. And it can't replace an architect because of those relationships, the feeling, the connection, the collaboration.
And
the listening.
A lot of it are these conversations, is that process. But not only are these tools for presenting work to our clients, but we really use them as design tools ourselves, because we can have an idea that in the past we might have been completely convinced by, but now we're able to model it and test it to another level. And sometimes we go, well, that's okay, and now we've got the speed and the iteration. We can kind of test other things before we even present it to the client. So it gives us a more conviction when we do go and present something. We've really tested it to another level now, and we're even more committed to it.
Yes.
So maybe that's part of why it's an easier sell, because we're even more confident in it.
It's technology that can sometimes be our own worst enemy, where there's just too much information. Robin Boyd used to document on 6 sheets of paper, and the masterpieces were built, and now we've got images and images and drawings and drawings. Are you starting to see your clients wanting augmented reality and the virtual reality experience of going through their projects?
No one's talked about augmented reality yet. We do provide more and more 3D views, but we're modeling more and more in 3D already. Augmented reality, no. We have been out to Big Plans once.
That's a massive life-size projector where we can walk through your building, walk through your project.
In a way, it's kind of it's a very powerful tool, because when you're looking at a set of plans, it's 1 centimeter is a meter, or 1 centimeter is 2 meters. It's hard to get a scale on that. Everything looks so small. I remember I was in a meeting with Peter Sander, one of my first bosses, and I think we were preparing for a meeting, and I said, do you want me to print these out at A3 or A1? And A1's 4 times the size. He says, always print the drawings big, because the rooms look bigger. So because we've got such a difficulty with scale, and especially for the uninitiated, So if you can go to a place like Big Plans, where you can walk across the room, people often find that what they were fighting to get an extra half a meter or a meter, they can often come in because the space is a lot bigger than they thought. But space is very, very deceptive. Often we'll find, I always get nervous because I know when a concrete slab's been poured on a site or a floor is finished, you'll get a call from the client saying this is really small.
Yeah, where there's no walls up.
Because but then you slowly see how a space gets bigger. Because when the walls go up, then you got a little bit more scale. Because not one floor plate, there are rooms. But sometimes there aren't rooms. It's just one big open plan.
And if there's no furniture, it also looks tiny. You need the furniture.
Well, then when the walls are lined, they feels a little bit bigger again. But it's really only when that furniture is in that you can get a sense of the scale. We don't. Because a bedroom, it's 3 or 4 meters. That's 3 or 4 or 5 strides. That's not, when you're just walking through space, that's not a lot. Like when you walk down the street, 3 or 4 strides is nothing, but that's a bedroom. So when you say, well, how is this a bedroom? How would a bed even fit here? I can just pace it out. It all comes down to the furniture.
It's right back to that trust.
So funny.
And having your architect stress about all the dimensions.
I know the call is coming, and it's like, that's just perception.
You can almost program that into your calendar. I'm mindful of the time, so I want to ask my last question, and that's what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? That's very open-ended. What gives me hope is people give me hope, but people are just really enthusiastic. People are passionate. So as long as there are people, and architects rely on people. So having people around us that are passionate about architecture, enthusiastic, that will always give me hope. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Rob.
Thanks, Ilana.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Will.
We're from Fishcatcher, and you're listening to Radio Karim.